It begins not with a shout, but with a sound. A laugh. It wasn't a sound of joy or mirth, but a sharp, glittering thing like a shard of glass catching the cold courthouse light. That laugh came from a young woman, her lips painted a defiant crimson as she looked at the pregnant wife standing opposite her in divorce court. She was the mistress, the victor, and she wanted everyone to know it. The betrayed wife, Eleanor, felt the sound pierce her deeper than any insult. But as the echo of that cruel laugh faded, another sound took its place, the soft, deliberate tap of a gavel. And the judge, a woman who had seen everything, leaned forward. What she said next wasn't just a reply. It was a reckoning that would shatter every life in that room. Eleanor Vance believed in the architecture of a life well built. Her marriage to Richard Sterling was supposed to be a cathedral, a grand structure of mutual respect, shared dreams and enduring love erected on a foundation of his ambition and her unwavering support. Their penthouse apartment, overlooking the sprawling metropolis of Astoria, felt like its magnificent spire. Floor-to-ceiling windows drank in the city lights, reflecting off polished marble floors, and the curated collection of modern art that Eleanor, with her background as a gallery curator, had so painstakingly assembled. It was a life that looked perfect from the outside, a masterpiece of domestic success. But lately the cathedral had felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a mausoleum. The silence between them had grown vast and hollow, echoing with unspoken words. Richard, a titan in the cutthroat world of private equity, was becoming a ghost in his own home. He'd return late, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume clinging to his bespoke suits, his phone a constant glowing barrier between them. He'd tap away at the screen, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips, a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Long day, honey," she'd ask, her voice a fragile bridge across the chasm. Incessant. "You wouldn't understand the pressure," he'd reply, his tone dismissive, his eyes never leaving the phone. He made her feel as if her world, the world of art auctions, of nurturing their home, of managing their complex social calendar, was a quaint, trivial dollhouse compared to his towering empire of finance. The first definitive crack in the foundation appeared on a Tuesday. Eleanor was sorting their credit card statements, a mundane task she performed with the same meticulous care she gave to verifying the provenance of a 19th century painting. Tucked between charges for business dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants and flights to Singapore was a name she didn't recognize, La Perle Rose. It was a high-end lingerie boutique with a charge that amounted to more than their monthly grocery bill. And then another, a weekend stay at a ridiculously opulent vineyard resort, the Serafina Estates, a place he had once promised to take her for their anniversary, but had then forgotten due to a deal closing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew. In that cold, clinical moment of financial accounting, the emotional truth she had been avoiding crystallized. It was a betrayal not just of passion, but of partnership. He was spending their shared future on someone else. That same week, she had visited her doctor for a checkup, feeling a persistent fatigue she'd blamed on stress. The doctor's words had upended her world in a completely different way. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling. You're about 12 weeks along. Pregnancy. A baby." A tiny miraculous life was growing inside her. For a fleeting moment, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over the anxiety. This could be the repair, the mortar to fix the cracks. A child would bring them back together, rebuild their cathedral on a new, unshakable foundation. She held the secret to her chest like a precious gem, waiting for the perfect moment to tell Richard, praying it would be the key to finding the man she had married. She chose a Friday evening, preparing his favorite meal, pan-seared scallops with a saffron risotto. She set the table with their best china and lit candles, a desperate attempt to conjure the ghosts of their happier past. He arrived as usual, late, dropping his briefcase by the door with a weary sigh. "Richard." She began her hands, trembling slightly as she held them over her still flat stomach. "I have something wonderful to tell you. I'm pregnant." She watched his face, searching for the flicker of joy, the spark of love, the relief she so desperately needed to see. Instead, his handsome features tightened into a mask of cold appraisal. He looked not at her face, but at her abdomen, as if he were evaluating a sudden unwelcome business liability. "Pregnant," he repeated the word flat and devoid of emotion. "Are you certain?" "Yes, the doctor confirmed it. We're going to be parents." Her voice wavered, the hope inside her beginning to curdle into dread. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of exasperation, not excitement. "Eleanor, the timing on this is inconvenient. Extremely inconvenient. Inconvenient." The word was a slap. "Richard, this is our baby." He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there terrified her. There was no warmth, no connection, only a chilling distance, as if he were looking at a stranger who had just presented him with a problem. He picked up his wine glass, swirled the deep red liquid, and took a slow, deliberate sip before speaking. "We need to talk," he said, his voice, the calm, measured tone he used before eviscerating a competitor in the boardroom. "A lot has been going on. I haven't been happy for a long time, Eleanor. I think it's time we were honest with each other." The risotto grew cold on their plates. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of their perfect, empty home. And Eleanor knew with a certainty that froze her to the very marrow of her bones that the foundations of her life were not just cracked. They were about to be dynamited. The echo in the marble hall was no longer silence. It was the sound of everything she had ever loved breaking apart. The conversation that followed Richard's chilling pronouncement was not an argument. It was a verdict. He spoke with the detached precision of a surgeon amputating a limb, laying out the reasons for his unhappiness with a litany of perceived slights and failings. She was too focused on her art hobbies, not supportive enough of the demands of his career. She didn't understand the pressure he was under. Her quiet, intellectual world bored him. Each word was a carefully chosen stone, and he was walling her out of the life they had built together. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, her hand protectively on her stomach. The baby she had hoped would be their salvation was now in his eyes an inconvenience. "So what are you saying, Richard?" She finally managed to ask, her voice a raw whisper. "I'm saying I want a divorce, Eleanor," he said, without a hint of remorse. "I've met someone who understands me, who excites me, someone I want to build a real future with." The name of the lingerie boutique flashed in her mind. La Perle Rose. "Who is she?" He had the audacity to almost smile. "Her name is Tiffany Monroe. You wouldn't know her. She's vibrant, full of life." The name meant nothing to her, but the description was a dagger. It was everything he was implying Eleanor was not. Old, stale, boring. A few days later, armed with a name, the grim reality of the internet filled in the blanks. Tiffany Monroe was a social media influencer, 24 years old with 1 million followers, and a portfolio of professionally shot photos of herself in exotic locations, draped in designer clothes, and dripping with jewelry Eleanor recognized as gifts from Richard. Her entire existence seemed to be a performance of curated luxury, a life devoid of substance but overflowing with style. She was everything Eleanor wasn't: loud, vapid, and publicly available for consumption. The first and only time Eleanor saw Tiffany in person before the court date was a calculated act of cruelty on Richard's part. He had asked her to meet him at a downtown cafe to discuss the preliminary terms of their separation. When Eleanor arrived, Tiffany was already there, seated next to Richard in the booth, her manicured fingers intertwined with his. She was even more striking in person, a confection of blonde extensions, eyelash implants, and glossy lips. She wore a tight, bright pink dress that screamed for attention. Tiffany looked Eleanor up and down, a slow, dismissive appraisal that took in her simple maternity blouse and her pale, tired face. A smirk played on her lips. "So you're the wife," Tiffany said, her voice a syrupy drawl. "Richie has told me so much about you." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Richard just sat there, allowing this humiliation to unfold. He was showcasing his prize, his vibrant new life, contrasting it with the drab, inconvenient one he was discarding. "The terms are simple, Eleanor," Richard said, sliding a folder across the table. "I'll be generous. A one-time payment. You sign the NDA, you waive all future claims to my assets, and we can all move on with our lives." Eleanor opened the folder. The number inside was an insult. It was a fraction of what she knew he was worth, a pittance designed to silence her and make her disappear quickly. It wouldn't even cover the down payment on a decent apartment in the city she had called home. "This is unacceptable, Richard," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and fury. "I helped you build your company. Our assets are intertwined, and I am carrying your child." Tiffany let out a little titter. "Don't be dramatic. It's not like you were slaving away in some coal mine. You bought paintings. Anyone can do that." The sheer ignorance of the comment, the dismissal of her expertise, and the years she had dedicated to creating their home and managing their investments was staggering. That was the moment Eleanor's grief hardened into resolve. The cathedral was in ruins, but she would not be buried in the rubble. "I'll see you in court, Richard," she said, pushing the folder back across the table. She stood her back straight and walked out of the cafe without a backward glance, the sound of Tiffany's light, mocking laughter following her out into the street. The next day she found Ava Chen. Ava was a lawyer whose name was whispered in circles of women who had been wronged by powerful men. She wasn't a bulldog from a big, flashy firm. She operated from a modest, elegant office in a historic brownstone, her walls adorned not with awards, but with impressionist prints. Ava was sharp, empathetic, and had a reputation for being meticulously thorough. She listened to Eleanor's story patiently, her gaze never wavering. She reviewed the insulting settlement offer with a thin, unimpressed smile. "Men like Richard Sterling believe they are kings," Ava said, her voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "They build their castles and they think everyone else is just a part of the scenery. They forget that the person who decorated the castle knows exactly where all the secret passages are. He's underestimating you, Eleanor. That's his first mistake. Our job is to make sure it's his last." For the first time in months, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the hope of reconciliation, but the hope of justice. She was no longer just a betrayed wife. She was a woman preparing for battle with a quiet, brilliant general by her side. The war for her future and the future of her unborn child had just begun. The family courtroom was a sterile, impersonal space, all polished wood and muted beige tones designed to leach the passion out of human misery. Yet the air was thick with it. On one side sat Eleanor and her lawyer, Ava Chen. Eleanor wore a simple dark blue maternity dress, a conscious choice to project sobriety and dignity. Her every movement was deliberate, an attempt to contain the maelstrom of emotions raging within her. The baby, her silent witness, kicked gently against her ribs. On the other side was the spectacle, Richard Sterling, looking imperious and bored in a suit that cost more than Eleanor's first car, and next to him, Tiffany Monroe. Tiffany was not a defendant or a plaintiff. Her presence was purely for effect. She was a living, breathing trophy of Richard's victory. She wore a form-fitting white dress, a colour of mocking innocence, and her blonde hair was styled in perfect cascading waves. She whispered constantly in Richard's ear, occasionally giggling into her hand, treating the solemn legal proceedings as if they were a tedious opening act for a much more interesting party. Their lawyer, Desmond Croft, a man with a perpetually smug grin and a reputation for brutal litigation, sat beside them, shuffling papers with an air of practiced nonchalance. The proceedings began, and Croft immediately went on the offensive. He painted Eleanor as a disgruntled, vindictive woman, a gold digger who had enjoyed a life of luxury and was now trying to extort a grossly disproportionate sum from the man who had provided it all. He minimized her contributions to the marriage, referring to her career as a curator, as a charming hobby, and their shared assets as Mr. Sterling's sole achievements. Mrs. Sterling did not contribute to the acquisition of these assets in any meaningful financial way. Croft argued, his voice booming with false sincerity. She was a beneficiary of Mr. Sterling's genius and hard work, not a partner in it. Ava Chen remained poised, making careful notes, her expression unreadable. Eleanor's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the table. Every word was a lie, a distortion of the years she had spent advising Richard on art investments that had yielded millions managing their properties and building the social network that had been crucial to his early success. The judge, a woman in her late 50s named Isabella Rossi, watched the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. Judge Rossi was known for her sharp intellect and her utter intolerance for courtroom theatrics. Her dark eyes missed nothing. The flashpoint came when Ava began to discuss the issue of child support and the future costs associated with raising the child. Given Mr. Sterling's declared income and established lifestyle, Ava stated calmly, "We are petitioning for a comprehensive trust to be established for the child's education and well-being, in addition to standard monthly support." Croft scoffed. "Your Honor, this is premature. My client is more than willing to meet his obligations, but the plaintiff is attempting to leverage her condition for personal financial gain." He said the word condition with a faint sneer, as if her pregnancy were a calculated tactic. At that moment, as the lawyers debated the financial implications of her unborn child's life, Tiffany Monroe leaned over to Richard. She whispered something, and then a sound cut through the tense courtroom air. It was a laugh. It was not a quiet chuckle. It was a high, tinkling, utterly derisive laugh, filled with the supreme confidence of a young woman who had won and felt no need for magnanimity. She covered her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand, her eyes sparkling with unconcealed amusement as she glanced at Eleanor's pregnant form. The laugh said it all. "Look at you, old, pregnant, and alone. I won. He's mine. Your baby is just a pathetic last-ditch attempt to hold on." A collective intake of breath swept through the small public gallery. Desmond Croft's smug smile faltered. Richard shot Tiffany a warning look, but it was too late. The sound, so out of place and so full of malice, hung in the air like a poisonous vapor. Eleanor felt as if all the air had been punched from her lungs. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. She lifted her chin and stared straight ahead, focusing on a crack in the wooden panelling behind the judge's bench. Judge Rossi, who had been looking down at her papers, slowly raised her head. Her face was a thundercloud. The room fell into a dead, absolute silence, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights. The judge's gaze did not fall on the lawyers or on Eleanor. It settled with laser-like intensity directly on Tiffany Monroe. Tiffany's amusement evaporated, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She straightened up, the smile wiped from her face. "Excuse me," Judge Rossi said, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight that commanded the attention of every person in the room. "I seem to have misheard. Was there something amusing, Ms. Monroe?" Tiffany paled. "No, Your Honor. I just coughed." It was a feeble, transparent lie. Judge Rossi's eyes narrowed. It sounded a great deal like laughter to me. "You are a guest in this courtroom, Ms. Monroe, not a member of the audience at a comedy club. This is a place where families are dismantled, where the futures of children are decided. A place of profound sadness. Tell me, what part of a discussion regarding the financial welfare of an unborn child do you find so entertaining?" The judge's words were not loud, but they cracked like a whip in the silent room. Richard Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Desmond Croft looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. Tiffany Monroe sat frozen, her face flushed with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. The theatre of cruelty had just been interrupted by its director, and she was not pleased with the performance. The power dynamic in the room had just tilted on its axis, and everyone felt it. The silence that followed Judge Rossi's question was heavy and suffocating. Tiffany Monroe looked to Richard for help, but he refused to meet her gaze, staring intently at a knot in the wood of the plaintiff's table. He had built his empire on controlling every variable, and for the first time, he was in a situation utterly beyond his control. I apologize, Your Honor." Tiffany stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It was inappropriate." "Inappropriate does not begin to describe it," Judge Rossi replied, her voice dropping to a steely calm that was more menacing than any shout. It was callous. It demonstrated a profound lack of empathy and a disturbing disrespect for the gravity of these proceedings. And it makes me question the character of those who would bring such a presence into this solemn space. Her eyes flicked momentarily to Richard, a silent, damning indictment. She then turned her attention to Desmond Croft. "Mr. Croft, your client, Mr. Sterling, purports to be a man of significant means and influence. His financial disclosures, however," she tapped a thick binder on her desk, "read more like a work of creative fiction than a transparent accounting of his assets." Croft leaped to his feet. "Your Honor, we have provided full and complete discovery. My client's businesses are complex, involving international trusts and holding companies. It is not a simple matter." "Oh, I am well aware of its complexity, Counselor." The judge countered, her eyes glinting. "I've seen structures like this before. They are designed to be labyrinthine. They are designed to obscure, to hide, to make it nearly impossible for a layperson or even a spouse of many years to understand the true extent of the marital estate. It is a strategy of financial obfuscation, and frankly, it is insulting to the intelligence of this court." She leaned forward, her gaze now fixed on Richard. "Mr. Sterling, you present yourself as a man who is willing to meet his obligations to his unborn child. Yet your initial settlement offered to your wife, a woman you were married to for a decade, the mother of your child, would barely keep her in a rented apartment for 2 years. Does that sound like a man of integrity to you?" Richard finally spoke, his voice tight with restrained anger. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my financial life is my own. I have been more than generous." Generosity is not the standard here, Mr. Sterling. Equity is, Judge Rossi retorted. And equity requires truth. The casual cruelty displayed by your companion just now, she gestured dismissively toward Tiffany, suggests a certain arrogance, a belief that you are above scrutiny, that you can simply discard a decade of marriage and a parental responsibility with a dismissive pittance. It makes me wonder what else you might be arrogant enough to conceal. A cold dread began to seep into Richard's composure. This was not going according to plan. The judge was supposed to be a bureaucratic functionary, rubber-stamping a prearranged, lopsided agreement. She wasn't supposed to think. She wasn't supposed to care. Judge Rossi turned to a clerk. I am not satisfied with these disclosures, not in the slightest. I am hereby ordering a full independent forensic accounting of Mr. Sterling's entire financial portfolio, both domestic and international. I want a court-appointed auditor to go through every shell corporation, every trust, every transaction for the past 10 years. We will adjourn these proceedings until that audit is complete. Desmond Croft's face went ashen. An independent forensic audit was his worst-case scenario. It was a costly, invasive, and incredibly lengthy process. Your Honor, that is an extreme and unnecessary measure, he protested. It will be a tremendous invasion of my client's privacy and business interests. Your client's privacy ended when he decided to obscure his assets from his wife, and this court, the judge said, her voice final. And Ms. Monroe's little outburst just convinced me that we need to be exceptionally thorough in our search for the truth. She picked up her gavel. Perhaps when we next convene, all parties will have a greater appreciation for the seriousness of this matter. The arrogance I have witnessed today is astounding. You, Mr. Sterling, seem to believe that your wealth places you in a different reality, with different rules. Allow me to disabuse you of that notion. In my courtroom, the only things of value are the truth and the welfare of a child, and I will uncover the former to protect the latter. With a sharp crack of the gavel, she declared the court adjourned. As Eleanor and Ava walked out, Richard was in a heated, hushed argument with his lawyer, while Tiffany stood to the side, looking utterly lost, her triumphant glow completely extinguished. The shocking reply everyone had been waiting for hadn't been a single clever line. It had been a declaration of war. A quiet, unassuming judge, spurred to action by a single, callous laugh, had just unleashed a force that threatened to bring Richard Sterling's entire gilded empire crashing down. For the first time, the smug, confident man who had tried to erase her looked afraid. And in that fear, Eleanor found a new, more potent kind of hope. The court-appointed forensic accountant was a man named Arthur Pence, a mild-mannered, bespectacled gentleman who looked more like a librarian than a financial bloodhound, but beneath his unassuming exterior was a relentless, methodical mind that delighted in untangling the most complex knots of financial deceit. For weeks, Arthur, Ava, and Eleanor were ensconced in a conference room, piled high with boxes of documents, the air thick with the smell of paper and brewing coffee. Richard's lawyers had tried to slow the process, drowning them in irrelevant paperwork and filing motion after motion to limit the scope of the audit. But Judge Rossi swatted away each objection with curt, decisive rulings. She had been provoked, and she was now personally invested in seeing the truth unearthed. Initially, the picture was just as Desmond Croft had described, a dizzying maze of holding companies registered in places like the Cayman Islands and Delaware trusts, with vague, impenetrable names and assets that seemed to flow between them with no discernible logic. It was a fortress designed to exhaust and confuse anyone who tried to breach its walls. He's moving money constantly, Arthur explained, pointing to a complex flow chart on a whiteboard. He buys an asset through one LLC, sells it to another, he secretly controls at an inflated price to create a paper loss, then leverages it through a trust in a third country. It's a shell game on a global scale. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, Eleanor's charming hobby. While sifting through a box of insurance manifests and acquisition records for their art collection, she noticed something odd. There was a painting, a moderately famous piece, by a mid-century abstract artist named Alistair Finch, that she knew Richard had purchased 5 years ago for $1.5 million. It was listed on the official asset disclosure as being valued at the same amount. "That's not right," Eleanor murmured, pulling the file. "The market for Finch has exploded in the last 3 years. I told Richard this piece was a major acquisition and would appreciate significantly. It should be worth at least $4, maybe $5 million by now. He's probably just undervaluing it to lower the total marital asset pool," Ava suggested. "No, it's more than that," Eleanor insisted, a flicker of memory igniting in her mind. "A year ago, Richard told me he was loaning the Finch to a gallery in Switzerland for a retrospective. I thought it was strange because I'm on the mailing list for that gallery, and I never saw any announcement of the show. I asked him about it later, and he said it was cancelled. On a hunch, Ava used her international legal contacts to inquire with the Swiss gallery. The gallery director's response came back within a day. They had no record of ever planning a retrospective for Alistair Finch. The painting had never been there." "So where is it?" Arthur asked. Eleanor's mind was racing. She remembered Richard's obsession with a particular private storage facility, one that offered climate-controlled vaults and extreme discretion, located near a private airfield. It was where he kept sensitive documents. On another hunch, she recalled the name of the facility, Argentum Secure Storage. With a new subpoena, granted swiftly by Judge Rossi, they gained access to the storage facility's records. They discovered Richard didn't just have a document box there. He had a massive climate-controlled vault leased under a shell corporation named Viridian Holdings. When the auditors opened the vault, it was like discovering a pharaoh's tomb. It was a private secret museum. The Alistair Finch painting was there alongside at least a dozen other major works of art that Eleanor had never seen before. There were sculptures, rare manuscripts, and a collection of antique watches. None of these items had been declared on any financial statement. He hadn't just undervalued their shared collection. He had a completely separate secret collection, worth a conservative estimate of over $30 million. But the most damning discovery was in a locked briefcase at the back of the vault. Inside were documents for yet another series of offshore entities. These weren't just for hiding marital assets. The paperwork, which included forged provenance records for several paintings, detailed a systematic scheme of art-based money laundering. Richard was buying art with undeclared income, using the secret vault to store it, then selling it through his offshore companies to clean the money, often to himself, before using it for other investments. "My God," Arthur breathed, looking at the papers. "This is beyond a divorce case. This is federal-level financial crime. He's not just hiding money from you, Eleanor. He's hiding it from the IRS and likely from his own business partners." Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. The man she had been married to was a stranger. His entire empire, the source of his arrogance and power, was built on a foundation of lies far deeper than mere infidelity. Tiffany Monroe wasn't the cause of their marriage's end. She was just a symptom of the profound corruption within the man himself. She was a cheap, disposable decoration he had purchased with stolen money. Ava Chen looked at Eleanor, her eyes full of a grim, steely light. "He thought you were just a curator." "A decorator," But you were the one person in the world with the expertise to see the one lie that could unravel everything. They now had more than just leverage for a divorce settlement. They had a nuclear bomb. The unraveling of the Sterling Empire had begun not with a banker or a regulator, but with a betrayed wife who knew the true value of a painting. The second court session was a world away from the first. The atmosphere was no longer merely tense, it was electric with impending doom. Richard Sterling and Desmond Croft sat at their table, but their previous swagger was gone, replaced by a rigid, brittle anxiety. Tiffany Monroe was conspicuously absent. The news of the court-ordered audit and the seizure of the secret vault's contents had clearly spooked her. Her brand of loyalty didn't extend to federal investigations. Eleanor walked in with Ava, her posture erect, her gaze steady. She was no longer the victim. She was the catalyst. She exuded a quiet power that seemed to diminish Richard, making him look smaller in his expensive suit. Judge Rossi entered and took her seat, her expression severe. "Mr. Croft," she began without preamble, "I have read the preliminary report from the forensic auditor. It makes for compelling reading." Ava Chen stood. "Your Honor, the audit has revealed that Mr. Sterling has willfully and systematically committed perjury in his financial disclosures. He has failed to declare assets conservatively estimated at over $30 million held in a secret vault under a shell corporation." She proceeded to lay out the evidence with devastating precision. The art, the watches, the manuscripts. For each item she presented the auditor's valuation. The numbers hung in the air, each one a testament to Richard's greed. Desmond Croft attempted to argue, "Your Honor, these items were personal investments made by my client, separate from the marital estate." "Separate," Ava cut in, her voice sharp. "The funds used to purchase these assets were siphoned directly from accounts and businesses that are marital property. We have the wire transfers to prove it. He wasn't just hiding assets, Your Honor. He was actively stealing from his own wife." Richard's face was a mask of fury. He was a king watching his castle be dismantled brick by brick in front of a public audience. "And it gets worse," Ava continued, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "Among the documents in that vault, we found evidence of a significant money laundering operation using inflated art appraisals and a network of offshore entities. We have reason to believe Mr. Sterling has defrauded not only his wife and this court, but also his business partners and the Internal Revenue Service." A low gasp rippled through the courtroom. This had escalated far beyond a simple, albeit nasty, divorce. This was the stuff of criminal indictments. Judge Rossi stared at Richard, her expression one of utter contempt. "Mr. Sterling, you came into my courtroom with a theatrical display of arrogance. You and your companion mocked your pregnant wife. You presented a financial picture that was a work of fiction. You assumed that your wealth and your army of lawyers would allow you to bully your way to a result that was not just unfair but fraudulent. You fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this institution." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The laugh I heard in this courtroom weeks ago was a symptom of your sickness. The belief that people are disposable, that rules are for others, that the truth is whatever you say it is. You believed you were untouchable." She picked up the auditor's report and held it up. "This document says otherwise." Her final ruling was swift and brutal. She awarded Eleanor 70% of all declared and undeclared marital assets, citing Richard's egregious financial misconduct and attempts to defraud the court. She granted Eleanor sole ownership of the penthouse apartment and the entirety of their shared legitimate art collection. She established a multi-million-dollar ironclad trust for the unborn child to be administered by an independent trustee, ensuring Richard could never touch it. The financial award was staggering, a figure that would cripple Richard's empire and ensure Eleanor and her child were secure for life. But she didn't stop there. That laugh, Judge Rossi said, her eyes finding Richard's, was an insult not just to Mrs. Sterling, but to the principle of justice this court represents. It was the sound of someone who thought they had gotten away with it. As it turns out, you haven't. She turned to the court clerk. I am ordering a certified copy of this entire audit, including all evidence of financial malfeasance, tax evasion, and money laundering, to be sent immediately to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Astoria and the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. This court's business with you may be concluded, Mr. Sterling, but I suspect your legal troubles are just beginning. Desmond Croft's jaw dropped. Richard Sterling went white as a sheet. The full weight of his actions finally crashed down upon him. He had been so focused on winning the divorce, on humiliating Eleanor, that he never imagined his own scheme would become the instrument of his complete and utter ruin. He had lost his wife, a massive portion of his fortune, and now potentially his freedom. The judge struck her gavel. The sound echoed like a final definitive gunshot. The reckoning was complete, all because of a laugh and the determined, underestimated woman it was aimed at. The first contraction seized Eleanor in the quiet pre-dawn hours, a fierce elemental clench that stole her breath and pulled her from a fitful sleep. For a moment, a primal fear washed over her. She was alone. In the sterile perfection of the penthouse, Richard would have been a distant, annoyed presence. Now, in the warm, cozy two-bedroom apartment she had rented, with the first disbursement from the asset seizure, the silence was both a comfort and a weight. There was no one to pace the floors, no one to call a car. Just her and the tiny, insistent life demanding its entry into the world. But the fear was fleeting, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and a gritty resolve she hadn't known she possessed a year ago. She was not the same woman who had arranged scallops on a plate, praying for her husband's affection. She was a survivor. She had faced down a corporate titan and his legal army in open court. She could certainly handle this. She breathed through the next wave of pain, her hand resting on the swell of her belly, a gesture of reassurance to both her child and herself. She timed the contractions on an app, and when they were 7 minutes apart, she calmly picked up the hospital bag she had packed weeks ago, called a car service, and left a voicemail for Ava Chen. The labor was long and arduous, a marathon of pain and exhaustion. In the sterile, beeping environment of the hospital room, the ghosts of her past year flickered at the edges of her vision. She remembered Richard's cold, dismissive face when she told him she was pregnant, the word inconvenient echoing in her mind. She remembered the tinkling, cruel sound of Tiffany's laughter in the courtroom, a sound designed to shatter her. She remembered the long, grueling nights with Arthur Pence, the forensic accountant, the dizzying columns of numbers, and the slow, dawning horror of her husband's deep-seated corruption. Each contraction felt like a purging, a violent expulsion of the past. With every wave of pain, she pushed out the memories of betrayal, humiliation, and fear. She was not just giving birth to a child. She was giving birth to a new version of herself, one forged in fire, stripped of illusion, and utterly indivisibly whole. When Ava arrived, her normally composed face etched with concern, she found Eleanor not weeping, but focused her eyes blazing with determination. Ava stayed holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, a steadfast sister in the final moments of the battle. And then, with one final, monumental effort, the world shifted. The pain receded, replaced by a new sound in the room, a lusty, indignant cry. A nurse placed a warm, wriggling bundle on her chest. Eleanor looked down at the tiny wrinkled face, the tuft of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that curled instinctively around her own. A wave of love so pure and overwhelming it was almost painful crashed over her. All the bitterness, all the anger she had carried for months, dissolved in that instant, washed away by a fierce, protective devotion. "She's beautiful, Eleanor," Ava whispered, tears in her eyes. "What's her name?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, this small, perfect creature, who had been her silent witness, her anchor through the storm. This child conceived at the end of a marriage, but born at the beginning of a new life. She was the physical manifestation of a future Eleanor had fought for. There was only one name that felt right. "Hope," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Her name is Hope." The first few months of Hope's life were a blur of sleepless nights and chaotic, beautiful days. Eleanor's new apartment, unlike the cavernous penthouse, quickly filled with the lived-in clutter of a real home. A swing in the living room, a brightly colored playmat on the floor, baby books stacked on the coffee table next to art auction catalogues. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with Hope's soft coos, her gurgling laughs, and often her demanding cries. Eleanor learned the rhythms of her daughter, the language of her needs, and in doing so, discovered a deep well of patience and strength within herself. One brisk afternoon, Ava came to visit, bringing with her a bottle of expensive champagne, "For you, you've earned it," and a plush giraffe for Hope. As Eleanor rocked the baby, Ava sat on the sofa, her briefcase open on the cushion beside her. She had become more than a lawyer. She was a confidant, a friend, the godmother to her child. "So it's officially over," Ava said, her tone a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal relief. Richard's legal team finally saw the writing on the wall. The U.S. attorney had him dead to rights with the money laundering charges. They tried to play hardball, but the evidence from our audit was a fortress. They couldn't find a single crack. "What was the final deal?" Eleanor asked, her gaze fixed on Hope's sleeping face. "He pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering and 2 counts of tax evasion," Ava explained. "In exchange, they dropped the other charges. He was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security facility. With good behavior, he'll be out in a little over 3. He had to forfeit nearly every liquid asset to the government to cover the fines and back taxes. The sterling name, once a mark of financial genius, is now synonymous with fraud. He's been publicly disgraced." Eleanor felt a strange sense of detachment, as if hearing about the fate of a character in a book she had read long ago. The man who had wielded so much power over her was now just a name on a legal document. A federal inmate number. And Tiffany? She asked the question less about the woman herself, and more about closing the final trivial loose end. Ava let out a humorless laugh. The fall of the House of Monroe was even faster. Her entire brand was built on being the arm candy of a mogul. When the mogul turned out to be a criminal, her sponsors dropped her overnight. She was sued by 2 luxury brands for devaluing their image. She tried to pivot, rebranding herself as a wellness guru, but the public wasn't buying it. Her comment sections were a wasteland of mockery. The last I saw, she'd made her accounts private. She tried to sell a tell-all story to the tabloids, but they said she was old news. She was a disposable accessory, and she's been disposed of. Eleanor nodded slowly, a quiet sadness touching her, not for Tiffany, but for the profound emptiness of a life built on such a flimsy foundation. She looked down at Hope, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. This was real, The weight of her daughter in her arms was real. The love she felt was real. Everything Richard and Tiffany had stood for was an illusion. With the legal battles behind her and her footing as a mother becoming more secure, Eleanor turned her attention to her own professional future. She used a portion of the settlement, a settlement so substantial it guaranteed her and Hope's security for life, to make her dream a reality. She leased a space in a historic brownstone in the heart of the city's gallery district and officially launched Vance Art Advisory. The day the sign was installed above the door with her name in elegant brushed gold letters was a landmark. It wasn't Mrs. Richard Sterling. It was Eleanor Vance, her own name, her own business, her own legacy. Her first major client was a young tech entrepreneur who had recently sold his company and wanted to build a collection, with meaning not just as an investment. He was intimidated by the art world's stuffiness and jargon. Eleanor guided him with a steady, knowledgeable hand, her passion for the art infectious. She wasn't just selling paintings, she was telling stories, connecting him to the history and emotion behind each piece. Her reputation began to grow. She was known for her sharp eye, her unimpeachable integrity, and her ability to make art accessible. The centerpiece of her new office gallery was the Alastair Finch painting. The day it was delivered uncrated from its protective cocoon was intensely emotional. It was the object that had started it all. A lie of omission, a secret he thought was safely buried. She ran her hand over the textured surface, the bold strokes of color. To Richard, it had been a mere financial instrument, a cog in his machine of deceit. To her, it was a masterpiece, and now a symbol of her liberation. It was the first asset listed for Vance Art Advisory, its value both monetary and deeply personal. It was a constant, beautiful reminder that her supposed hobby had in fact been her sharpest weapon. One evening, months later, Eleanor was working late. Hope was sleeping peacefully in a bassinet by her desk. She was finalizing a proposal for a new client, a small regional museum looking to acquire contemporary pieces. The office was quiet, the city lights twinkling outside the large bay window. She felt a profound sense of peace, a rightness to her world that had been absent for so long. On her desk was a small lacquered box. She opened it. Inside were a few mementos from her old life, including a photo from the early days of her marriage to Richard. They were on a trip to Italy, both of them, young, smiling, looking genuinely happy. For a long time, looking at that photo had been agonizing. It represented a promise that had been broken, a love that had soured into something ugly. Now she looked at the young woman in the photo with a sense of compassion. That woman hadn't known what was coming. She hadn't known the depths of her own strength. Eleanor no longer mourned for her or the life she had lost. That life had been a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but empty within. She gently placed the photo back in the box and closed the lid, not with anger or sadness, but with the simple, quiet finality of closing a book whose story was finished. She picked up Hope, her daughter stirring in her sleep, and walked over to the window. Below the city hummed with life, a million stories unfolding in the night. She held her daughter close, breathing in her sweet, milky scent. Richard had tried to define her as a discarded wife. The world might have seen her as a victim, but she had refused both labels. Her life was no longer a structure someone else had built for her, a cold cathedral of marble and glass. It was a canvas, vast and white and waiting, and she, Eleanor Vance, was the artist. With hope in her arms, she looked out at the endless lights, a world of possibility at her feet. She was ready to paint. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about resilience. It's about standing firm in your own truth, even when the world tries to tell you you're worthless. A single cruel laugh was meant to be the final word in her humiliation, but instead it became the first note in her anthem of triumph. She was underestimated, dismissed and wronged, but she transformed her pain into power, using the very knowledge her husband belittled to uncover his web of deceit. Justice in the end wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming her narrative and building a new, better life on her own terms. What did you think of the judge's final decision? Was it justice or was it revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of strength and vindication resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama.